Delegation's the way forward. You can't run a business unless you can actually get people motivated and delegate responsibility to them.
Hey guys, it's Matt Haycox here, and welcome to another episode of the Matt Haycox Show. Now today I've got with me Paul Green, who's the CEO of over50smoney.com and the co-founder of the Energy Helpline. Now, being a mature consumer himself, Paul became increasingly frustrated with the advertising world that seemed to ignore anyone aged over 35. And that's what made Paul launch over50smoney.com and the services dedicated to providing important financial tips and guides for people nearing or enjoying their retirement. And Paul is dedicated to spending time lobbying to the over 50s community to try and secure the best deals from the most reputable companies. Thanks a lot for being here. And obviously I've given a bit of background to you and the businesses that you were involved with. Can you I guess tell us where it all began? Flesh it out a bit before the businesses I mentioned.
Yeah. So originally I did economics at university. Back in 1982 when I graduated, it was just like it is now, no jobs. Yeah, no jobs for graduates. So I decided to do more studying, went back, did a master's, finished that from Manchester in 1984. 2 jobs were available in 1984. There's 2 lots of recruiters out there, accountants and IT people. So I decided accountancy sounded a little bit boring, so I went into IT. And the IT background then took me into consultancy. So I spent a long time in management consultancy, which was a pretty good kind of training ground for business, really. So out of that part of my life, I learned, I think, probably 3 things that were really important to me as I've gone through and become an entrepreneur. So the first thing is communication. So I think communication is really important. Doesn't matter whether you're communicating to your customers or your staff. You need to be really clear about what you're doing and why you're doing it and why people should do it with you. So next thing that I learned was delegation. So I remember seeing a line of people outside my office, and I realised that they couldn't do anything because they were waiting for me to sign off their work or tell them what to do next. So delegation's the way forward. You can't run a business unless you can actually get people motivated and delegate responsibility to them. And I think the other big lesson that I've learned is there's more than one way of skinning a cat. Yeah. So some people have got very fixed views about how things need to be done and why things need to be done in a certain way. But actually in business, so long as you focus on the end result, you can actually achieve it many different ways. So a bit of flexibility is pretty important. And those 3 things I think are really important to me in the person that I've become. So when I was 40, I decided I didn't want to work for anybody anymore. That was a little bit of lifestyle choice because I was a father and I wanted to be able to spend more time with my family. But it was also about trying to create something that I had built myself. So initially I started a consulting business called the Oraquin Group. Problem with that is you still had to be on fees. So I then looked around for something where the business could make money even if I wasn't working. And that's how I came to start the Energy Price Comparison Company. I ran that business for the best part of 15 years and then did an exit to private equity. And as part of that, we brought in another company called UK Web Media, and we formed a new business called Comparison Technologies Limited, which does price comparison for a range of services, including home phone, broadband, digital TV, as well as the energy things. So after selling that business, I really thought about what I wanted to do next, and over 50s money has been something that's been in my mind for a while. And as you said, one of the real things that I've noticed is actually the over 50s are largely ignored by advertisers. So 95% of advertising spend is aimed at the under 35s, and yet the over 50s account for 76% of the UK's wealth.
What do you think the reason for that anomaly is? Because I guess as someone who's looking to extract cash, extract value from a marketplace, it would sound a very obvious market to go after. That 76% of the wealth is held by those people. Why are they not being targeted?
I think a lot of marketing managers and sales managers are really trying to get what they consider to be aspirational customers. And I think there's an assumption that when you're old, you're no longer aspirational. And of course, that just isn't true.
What would you say? It's more a vanity play, effectively, than that it's more appealing dealing with an aspirational customer than it might not be sexy dealing with the over 55s.
So if you take something like car advertising, very, very few car adverts show people over the age of 50 in them, and yet a lot of cars are bought by people who are in their 50s and 60s. So there's no real explanation, because just because you're young doesn't mean that you're a more aspirational or more likely person to buy the vehicle.
Now, obviously, you spotted that gap in that market. Presumably because you were a potential customer in that market space at the time. For our viewers and listeners of the show who are business people, aspirational entrepreneurs, etc. What advice could you give to someone looking to try and spot a gap in a market and how they should capitalise on that?
So I think spotting a gap in the market is quite difficult, but one of the things you can do is you can look at established businesses and see whether or not their coverage is full enough. So an example might be that you'll find that an established business that you respect actually is covering a very wide spectrum of sectors, but it may not be covering any particular sector with expertise. You may also just look around and think about what you do, what your friends do, what your family does, and just find there isn't really something that delivers what people actually need. An example of that would be the whole sort of delivery model for ready meals and food. So if you go back a few years ago, somebody just thought, do you know what, everybody's driving to the takeaway, but actually if you get the takeaway to drive to you, it's a better service.
So talk to me about your marketing specifically, and obviously you've niched down into the over 50s market. And one of the things that I often talk about with my audience and people I consult with is that how important it really is to find that niche, not just because you're solving a problem in that area, but because of the importance of knowing very specifically who you're marketing to, because if you try and market to everyone, then ultimately you're not going to do a very good job of marketing to anyone. And do you think was the marketing side of things featuring in your thinking when you were solving the problem, or I guess is one a byproduct of the other?
No, we very much thought about how to connect to the target market for the business from the beginning. And so one of the problems with a lot of marketing to older people is it doesn't really think through what older people actually want. So if you take somebody who's over 50 and you compare it to somebody in their 20s or 30s, somebody over 50 tends to like detailed content. They like to be able to understand the issues before they make a decision. So actually what we've done is we've tended to write longer pieces, and we publish those pieces in a way that they're accessible, but they are quite content rich. The other thing with really complicated things that we do, so for example things like pensions, is to make that complexity accessible to ordinary people. And so I do think there's a lot of requirement to use things like video to actually do the explanation, so you don't have to trawl through a very long set of detailed text which may be too difficult for people to understand.
Oh, now, whilst you, I guess, brand yourselves as over 50 and market to that space, do you deal with customers who are, I guess, from different age brackets? You know, should they fall across you by accident? I mean, I guess I wouldn't naturally, you know, go and Google an over 50s website, but you know, if I happen to come across it and want your services, do you still offer them to everybody?
Yeah, I mean, we offer the services to everybody. So an example of where younger people use the service will be if they're looking after the affairs of their parents, for example. Yeah. So and
do you market to those kind of people specifically?
We're now starting to bring that sort of marketing on. So one of the things we've done is we've looked at different segments of customers that we think will use the service. So one of which is what is the sandwich generation. So the sandwich generation may be over 50, may be in their 40s. The sandwich generation are, you know, the people who are looking after their parents and their kids. And so, you know, they will have a wide range of issues that they need to deal with because they'll need to look after their own set of circumstances. They'll need to make sure that they're doing things right for their families, both younger family members and older family members.
And obviously, speaking of the older ones again now, just to contextualise this for anyone listening after the fact, you know, we're recording this in the end of August 2020, so we're very much still in the COVID Corona problems. I mean, yes, we're out of lockdown, but you know, people are still very much suffering. I mean, how have the over 50s specifically and also energy bills and pricing, how have they been affected by Corona? And how have you seen an impact on your customer?
So I think the over 50s are still waiting to see the worst impacts of coronavirus, right? So in the early days, obviously older people suffered with poorer health outcomes. But I think we all know that the recession is going to impact jobs. And one of the things that we know traditionally is that older people end up being in long-term unemployment much more so than younger people. So a lot of the government's initiatives today have been about, you know, moving towards the entertainment industry and about trying to get young people into jobs. But actually, as companies start to contract, we would expect the older workers to be the ones who are made redundant and who will struggle to find work later on. So of course that means you'll have a potential generation of older people whose working life is going to come to an end before they've planned their retirement, which means their pensions won't be funded. So you're going to potentially have a problem where you know, benefits are going to have to be paid out to those people for an extended period of time. The good news, because you mentioned things like bills, is actually up to now bills have been quite low, because with the decline of use of energy, because people shut their offices, industries were closed, energy prices have gone down. The question is what happens as the economy starts to open, right? Because these things will bounce back.
And I guess as they do start to bounce back, the bills, what advice are you giving to your market of how they can budget better and deal with that situation?
Yeah, so the advice is really, we can see this big recession coming. We can see that people are going to lose their jobs. We can see that incomes are going to be depressed. So start to plan now, work out your budgets. Make sure you switch to cheaper providers for the big bills, like your energy bills, home phone, broadband, car insurance, home insurance, all of those things. Just switch to the cheapest providers. Think about how you normally go shopping. You know, think about the things that you can cut down on or that you can replace with cheaper options. Once you've got your spending sorted out, then you really need to think about protecting your income and whether or not there are things that you can do to mean that you will be earning going forwards. And I think for a lot of older people that possibly means trading full-time work into part-time work, because I think that's probably the way in which they're going to, remain in the workforce.
I mean, talking about energy bills and changing from one supplier to another. I mean, I guess obviously not in the over 50 space, but I guess it's similar in all demographics and residential and commercial. And it's one of those areas where in my businesses I'm always getting contacted by people who want to change energy supplier for us, or mates who know a friend who want us to change energy suppliers. I mean, how many times realistically can a customer change and benefit from it? And I'm trying to think what my question is. I'm not going to say like how sustainable is it, because obviously you're going to need the bills forever. But how many times do people need to review? How many times can they swap? Because I mean, normally when people contact us, I say, listen, we've just swapped last month, or I've got another mate who's already done it. I can't give 6 people every 6 months the chance to look at our energy bills, because ultimately how many different suppliers are out there? Am I being naive, or? So
my recommendation is that you check them every year. If you check them every year, then you should be on a good deal. So it doesn't typically pay to shop around every couple of months, because the market doesn't change that much, and the cheapest deals actually are a contract, and you need to stay in the contract until you get to the end of it. So
how long is a contract typically for? 12 months?
So the cheapest options tend to be 12-month contracts, because the energy suppliers can hedge their supply of energy for that period of time cheaper than over a longer period of time. So I think the market has moved towards benefiting people who engage every 12 months.
So a minute ago you mentioned that the full impact of Corona is yet to be felt by the over 50s. I mean, I guess probably a worrying statement for many to hear. Given how badly people think they've already been affected. Can you flesh out on that for me, and tell me what you exactly mean and what you think people are due to expect?
Yeah, so I think if you're over 50, unfortunately, you are more likely to lose your job as a result of Corona than if you're younger. And the reason for that is basically older people tend to be more expensive people. And actually, one of the things that's happened as a result of the pandemic is that people really value tech, because they've seen a lot of businesses move offline. And whether it's right or wrong, older people are generally viewed as not being as tech savvy as younger people.
I've got an image of my mum now banging the remote control with her stubby fingers.
Yeah. So I think job security is a big issue. I think another issue is actually your income, because a lot of people who are retired, when they did their sort of financial planning, one of the things that they've done is they've invested in stocks from big blue chip companies on the basis that they'd get dividend payments, but actually dividend payments from the likes of BP, Shell, British Telecom, etc., they've all been slashed. So a lot of people will not have that kind of little top up on their income that they've been expecting and that they've been getting reliably for years. So actually they will be under pressure, both in terms of those things, and also in terms, if they're a little bit younger, of actually being in work.
I want to talk to you a bit more about budgeting as well, because I mean, obviously, we're talking a lot here about in the context of the over 50s, and obviously, it's relevant to the over 50s for how they should be budgeting. But I think for me, one of the biggest problems is disciplines like that are not instilled in people early enough. And whilst it's probably never too late to start, if you're just learning how to budget at 50, you have probably missed out on some reasonably fundamental saving years over your life. But I mean, I guess the same principles apply whether you're 18, 50, or 65. Give me your top tips for our audience. Whatever age they are.
So it doesn't matter how old you are. You should always be on top of your budget, right? And doing a budget isn't difficult. So the first thing you need to do is work out where you spend money. Yeah, and you can typically do that by looking at your credit card bills, your bank statements, and for things that you use cash, you just need to be disciplined and write down what you're spending your money on over probably a month, right? So if you look at your credit card bills, bank statements over a period of about a year. Write down what you spend your cash on for about a month. Then look at all of that and figure out how much money you are actually spending on average on a monthly basis. That's more difficult than the next one, right? The next one is work out what your income is. So the reason spending is more difficult than income is we spend a lot more than, or we have a lot more sources of spending than we have sources of income, right? So typical sources of income will be salary, but it will also include anything that you've got, such as investment income. So returns from savings, can include things like income from property rental. Sometimes people have income from other bits and pieces of work they do, such as consulting. So add that all up. And then what you need to do is compare your outgoings with your incomings, and you need to figure out how that all works and whether or not you need to make savings. The biggest problem with budgeting is most people don't budget to include savings. So if you want to invest in a pension, or you want to save money for a bigger house or whatever, you have to work out how much money you should be saving every month. And you just need to develop the discipline to actually put that money away and take it out of the spending pot.
And in this particular marketplace, as in this Corona time period, and very much for your over 50s as well, I mean, what would your advice to them be about earning more? Because it makes very much sense what you're talking about budgetary wise there, but I'm much more a fan of trying to earn more rather than spend less. And I guess if you really have reached your peak of earning ability, then you've got no choice but to save. But I would also I fail to believe that that most people can't develop some kind of extra streams of income, whatever levels they may be. How would you recommend that for your marketplace?
Yeah, so I think it depends who you are and where you are in your career, right? So if you are fully working and you're earning enough money, maybe you just need to be content with that. However, I'm like you. I always like to know that I can earn a little bit more.
You can never be content. Never
be content, exactly. And I think maybe that's the entrepreneur within both of us. So the sort of things you can do is you can figure out what you do that you can actually earn money from. Yeah. So for example, I have taught myself to be a master baker. Completely done over the internet, but I'm a master baker. I'm a sourdough freak. If I wanted to, I could probably monetize that, yeah? Because actually, I've consumed lots and lots of blog posts, and I've bought things through those blog posts, so that's something that I could do if I really, really wanted to.
We know who's doing the cooking in your house.
Not all of it. The baking, yeah.
So we've just been talking about the fact that the over 50s are probably the most vulnerable financially at the moment, because that they're the most likely to be made redundant when the full effects of COVID are felt. I mean, for people who haven't actually quite hit that yet, but are probably now needing to understand this and prepare for the worst, other than budgeting right, what other advice have you got for these people?
Yeah, so I think there are a lot of things that people can do. So the first thing, the over 50s typically are very proud people, and they don't share their concerns with their colleagues and their friends. So I think one of the most important things is always talk to people who you feel that you can trust, share and ask for advice. I think that's really, really important. Actually, go online. If you go online and you key these concerns in, you'll find a variety of different services that will be available to you. Some of them will be local, some of them may be run by local support groups, including possibly your local council. Some of them may be charities. For older people, then Age UK continues to be a really good source of information. If you're a little bit younger, there are charities out there that you will find that are now looking at these things. If you're concerned about things like you're a renter and you're concerned about, whether or not you'll be able to pay your bills, and whether or not your tenancy is secure, there's all sorts of things you can do. Speak to your landlord. Make sure that you're in dialogue with anybody that you're likely to default on payments to, so that you can actually take these things forwards early rather than being on the back foot. And at the end of the day, if you really, really, really struggle, then some of the debt management services can actually be very supportive.
So we're talking about the fact that a lot of the over 50s are more likely than most other age sectors to be looking at losing jobs once the full effect of COVID's felt. And I guess also these people are people who are coming up to pensionable age as well, and undoubtedly there's going to be dramatic effect on people's pension pots now. So I guess these people have been hit with a double whammy really. I mean, what can you talk to us about from a pension perspective?
Yeah, so from a pension perspective, you're right, pension values are going to be under pressure, not least because of the things that pensions are invested in, yeah? So the London stock market's still 20% lower than where it was at the beginning of the year. So your pension value will reflect that. So if you're concerned about your pension, you should speak to your pension provider. If you're in a company scheme, there will be somebody nominated within that company to look after the scheme. You can make an appointment to see them, talk to them about it. If you've got a private pension, then look up the contact details for that pension. Make sure that you have all of the details, numbers of accounts and things, but then get in contact with the pension provider, ask them to go through an audit of where your pension is. You may be able to make some different choices with your pension. So sometimes you can change the investment rules that are applied to it. So an example of that would be if your pension currently can only be invested in the UK, you might want to look at overseas investments. So as we know from the last couple of weeks, stock markets in the US have reached new highs. So that is something that you could consider doing as a way of trying to redress those losses that you probably have incurred.
So, what do you think the knock-on effect to that is going to be? To the likes of the bank of mom and dad, for example. Are people going to be struggling even more so than they already are to get deposits, to get on the property ladder? What do you think the knock-on effect down the chain is going to be?
Yeah, so I think the bank of mum and dad will be called on to continue to support the kind of younger generations in the family. I think that will become harder for two reasons. So firstly, mum and dad may be financially stretched themselves, but also we've seen a developing practice by the lenders to actually crack down on the bank of mum and dad. So Nationwide, for example, are now asking people to prove that they've saved the money rather than it's been given to them. And unless you can prove that you've saved the money, your deposit now won't be valid.
Well, Paul, thanks a lot for being here. You've had some fantastic advice and fantastic insights and some stories which are, I guess, as relevant to the under 50s as they are to the over 50s. Just before we go, now's your chance to give yourself a shout out to tell people where they can find you, or what else they need to know. Have you got what's your main message for everyone watching and listening? Yeah,
so I think my main message is just because you're over 50, it doesn't mean that you're not an aspirational person. It doesn't mean that you're not somebody who is important, and you should be active in markets, and you should make sure that you get the best out of your life. And then over50smoney.com is the place to go and find out about these things, and we will be campaigning on the behalf of the over 50s very, very strongly to try and make sure they get a better deal.
Well, I'll be at over 50 one day myself, so I'll be paying attention, and I know where to come when the time's right. So thanks a lot again for being here, Paul. And guys watching and listening, hope you've enjoyed this. Hope you've enjoyed what Paul's had to say and the advice he's had to give. As always, if you've liked it, please press like, and then also subscribe to the channel. You'll get to hear lots more articles and interviews with people like Paul, other aspirational and inspirational business characters. So I'll see you again next time.